My name is Talia, and I'm 26 years old. I still remember the moment everything in my family quietly fell apart just days before Thanksgiving. It began with a phone call from my mom that sounded strangely distant, the kind of voice people use when they've already made a decision about you. I was standing in my apartment kitchen, staring at the grocery list I had been making for the trip home, when she said something that made my heart drop. My mom said, "You won't be at Thanksgiving this year. Your sister's new husband thinks you'd ruin the vibe." For a few seconds, I thought I had misheard her. Ruin the vibe? I asked her what she meant, but she just sighed like she was already exhausted by the conversation. She told me that my sister's new husband, Ethan, felt uncomfortable around me, and that since this was his first Thanksgiving with the family, they didn't want drama. Drama? I barely even knew the guy. I had met him exactly twice, once at their rushed wedding dinner and once at a short family brunch where he barely spoke to me. Still, somehow I had already become the problem. I stood there gripping my phone while my mom kept explaining things as if it were perfectly reasonable to uninvite your own daughter from a holiday. She said it would only be this year and that maybe next year things would feel different. But what hurt the most wasn't even the excuse. It was how easily everyone seemed to agree with it. My sister hadn't called me, my dad hadn't called me. It was like they had all quietly decided I didn't belong at the table anymore. I felt that heavy, familiar feeling I'd had growing up, the one where I somehow ended up being the odd one out in my own family. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to ask what exactly Ethan had said about me. But the truth was, I already knew how those conversations went. If I pushed, they'd say I was proving his point. So instead, I did the one thing no one expected. I said nothing. I just told my mom I understood and ended the call. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with the silence pressing in around me. Outside, the city was already glowing with early holiday lights, but inside my chest, it felt dark and hollow. I kept replaying those words in my mind. "You won't be at Thanksgiving this year." It sounded less like a request and more like a verdict. Eventually, anger replaced the sadness. Who was Ethan to decide whether I belonged in my own family? And more importantly, why were they letting him? I tried to remember our short interactions. At the wedding dinner, he had watched me strangely when I mentioned where I worked, like the information had caught him off guard. At brunch, he had asked me a few careful questions about my job, my office, my position, questions that felt less like curiosity and more like he was trying to confirm something. At the time, I brushed it off as awkward small talk. Now, lying awake in the dark, I wondered if there had been something else in his expression, something like recognition or fear. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I hadn't done anything to this man. I didn't even know him well enough to offend him. By midnight, I had convinced myself to stop caring. If my family didn't want me there, fine. I'd make my own plans for Thanksgiving. I'd cook something simple, maybe watch movies, maybe even take a short trip somewhere quiet. I told myself I was okay with it, but deep down, the rejection still stung like a fresh bruise. The next morning, I went to work determined to push the whole thing out of my mind. My office building downtown was already buzzing when I walked in, the usual morning rush of employees, ringing phones, and the smell of coffee drifting through the halls. Work had always been the one place where things felt steady and predictable. I liked that. I liked being someone people relied on instead of someone they excluded. I had just settled at my desk and opened my laptop when my assistant knocked lightly on the door. She looked a little confused. "Talia," she said carefully, "there's a man in reception asking for you. He says it's urgent." I frowned. I wasn't expecting any meetings that morning. "Did he give a name?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Ethan." My stomach tightened instantly. What was my sister's husband doing here? For a moment, I wondered if something had happened to my sister or my parents, but my assistant didn't look worried, just puzzled. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked out toward reception, my thoughts racing with questions. When I turned the corner and saw him standing there, he looked nothing like the calm, polite guy I had met at the wedding. He looked tense, almost panicked. The second his eyes landed on me, his face went pale like he had just seen a ghost. For a split second, neither of us moved. Then, suddenly, everything exploded at once. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he shot to his feet, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. And right there in the middle of my office reception area with